Commander Jake Morrison walked into the huge round room. His boots made soft sounds on the smooth floor. The room was bigger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. The ceiling went up so high that he could barely see the top. Strange lights floated in the air without any wires or supports dot all around him. Alien creatures sat in chairs that looked nothing like human furniture. Some chairs were made of crystal. Others looked like they were made of water that somehow stayed in one shape. The aliens themselves were even stranger. Jake had seen pictures of them before, but being here in person was different. The Zelkari looked like tall, thin humans, but with 4 arms instead of 2. Their skin was pale blue and seemed to shine under the floating lights. They had no hair, and their eyes were much larger than human eyes. When they moved, it was smooth and flowing, like they were dancing even when they were just sitting down. The Korthax were completely different. They looked like giant lizards that had learned to walk on 2 legs. Their scales were dark green and black. When they breathed, small puffs of steam came from their nose holes. Their eyes were yellow with black slits in the middle, just like a snake. Sharp teeth showed when they opened their mouths to speak. The Vex were the strangest of all. They looked like huge insects with 6 arms and 4 legs. Their bodies were covered in hard, shiny shells that were dark purple. Their heads had big compound eyes that looked like they were made of thousands of tiny mirrors. When they moved, Jake could hear their shells clicking together. There were many other alien species in the room. Some looked like walking trees. Others seemed to be made of living metal. A few looked like they were made of colored gas that had somehow learned to think and speak. Jake had studied them all, but seeing them in person made him feel very small. He stood in the center of the room with 2 other humans behind him. Lieutenant Amy Parker was tall and thin with short red hair. She was one of the smartest people Jake had ever met. She could speak 5 different alien languages and had studied their cultures for years. Sergeant Ben Collins was shorter and wider, with dark skin and kind eyes. He was the kind of soldier who would fight to protect his friends. No matter what happened, the 3 humans wore their best military uniforms. The dark blue fabric was clean and pressed. Their boots were polished until they shone. Small metal pins on their chests showed their ranks and the missions they had completed. Jake was proud of how they looked, but he could see that the aliens were not impressed. Whispers filled the room. The aliens were talking to each other in their own languages, but Jake's earpiece translated their words into English. What he heard made his face turn red with anger, but he kept his expression calm. A good commander never showed weakness in front of the enemy. Look at them, one of the Zelkari was saying. They have no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. How did such weak creatures ever survive on their own planet? A Korthax hissed in what Jake now knew was laughter. I heard they fight with metal sticks and make loud noises before battle. They call it music, but it sounds like the crying of young animals. Music, clicked one of the Vex. They think sounds will protect them from plasma weapons. How silly these humans are. More laughter came from all around the room. Jake felt his hands form fists at his sides, but he kept them there. Amy shifted her weight behind him. Ben made a small growling sound that only Jake could hear. The leader of the Zelkari stood up from his crystal chair. His name was Ambassador Thexlin, and he was very important in the Stellar Alliance. He was tall, even for a Zelkari, and his 4 arms moved in patterns that Jake had learned meant he was feeling superior to everyone else in the room. Humans of Earth, Thexlan said, his voice smooth and cold. You have asked to join our Stellar Alliance. You want to be part of our great community of advanced civilizations. But we must ask ourselves, what can you offer us? He gestured with all 4 arms toward Jake and his companions. You have no advanced technology that we do not already possess. Your weapons are simple compared to ours. Your ships are slow and clumsy. Your bodies are weak and soft. You live for such a short time that you barely have time to learn anything useful." More murmurs of agreement came from around the room. Jake saw alien heads nodding in every direction. Vexlin continued, "But most strange of all are your military traditions. We have studied your history. Before battle, you gather in groups and make noise with your mouths. You call this singing. You wave pieces of colored cloth on sticks. You march in straight lines while playing simple instruments. You tell stories around fires like children." The laughter was louder now. Some of the aliens were making sounds that Jake guessed were their versions of laughing. The Korthax were hissing. The Vex were clicking their shell parts together rapidly. Even the tree-like aliens were rustling their leaves in what seemed like amusement. "We have seen recordings of your warriors," added a Korthax general. "They paint their faces with bright colors. They yell and scream. They sing songs about their mothers and their homeland. Do they think the enemy will be frightened by a lullaby?" "Perhaps," said an Aquan who flowed like water. "They believe that melody can stop laser fire. Maybe they think a pretty song will make plasma bolts disappear." The room erupted in more laughter. Jake felt his jaw muscles tighten. Behind him, he could hear Amy breathing faster. Ben's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Jake made a small gesture that told him to stop. Finally, the noise died down. Vexlin raised all 4 arms for silence. "So we ask you, humans, why should we allow such primitive creatures into our alliance? What can you possibly offer that we need?" Jake stepped forward. His voice was calm and steady when he spoke, but there was something in his tone that made the laughter stop. "We accept your challenge. Give us a chance to prove ourselves in battle, but I want you to remember something when we do." He looked around the room, meeting the strange eyes of dozens of different species. "When we sing before battle, we're not just making noise. We're calling on the spirits of every human warrior who ever lived. We're connecting with 10,000 years of fighting against impossible odds. We're remembering every victory our people ever won against enemies who thought they were stronger than us." The room was completely quiet now. Even the small sounds of breathing and movement had stopped. Jake's voice grew stronger. "You think our songs are funny. You think our traditions are silly. But when we sing, we become more than just individual soldiers. We become part of something that has been growing stronger for thousands of years. We become the voice of our ancestors, and that voice has never been silenced." He paused and looked directly at Vexlan. "So yes, we accept your challenge. But remember this moment. Remember how you laughed at our songs. Because when this is over, you're going to understand what those songs really mean." The silence stretched on for a long moment. Then, slowly, the laughter began again. But this time, it sounded forced and uncertain. Jake smiled grimly. They had no idea what they had just awakened. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting in the council chamber. Now Jake Morrison stood on the surface of a planet called Kepler 442b, looking out at the most challenging battlefield he had ever seen. The ground was covered with sharp rocks and deep cracks. Strange purple plants grew in patches here and there, but most of the land was bare and hostile. The sky above was a weird orange color, because this planet orbited a red star instead of a yellow one like Earth's sun. The air was thin, making it harder to breathe. The gravity was stronger than Earth's, making every step feel like he was carrying a heavy backpack. Behind him, his troops were setting up their equipment. The Stellar Alliance had agreed to the challenge, but they had made the rules very unfair. The humans would face 3 different alien armies at the same time. They would be outnumbered 3 to 1. The aliens got to choose the battlefield, and the type of weapons that could be used. Captain Lisa Hayes walked over to Jake, carrying a datapad with the latest intelligence reports. She was a tough woman with short brown hair and steady green eyes. She had fought in more battles than most soldiers twice her age. Her uniform was already dusty from the harsh conditions on this planet. "Sir, I've got the enemy positions mapped." "Out," she said, showing him the screen. "The Shelkari have taken the high ground on the eastern ridge. They've got energy weapons that can reach almost anywhere on the battlefield. The Korthax have dug in around the central valley. Their plasma cannons can cut through our armor like paper. The Vex are using the western caves as their base. They're planning to swarm us with their flying units." Jake studied the map. It looked impossible. The enemy had every advantage. They had better weapons, better armor, better technology, and they knew this planet better than the humans did. Any military school would teach that this battle could not be won. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres joined them, along with Corporal Jenny Walsh. Mike was a big man with dark hair and scars on his hands, from years of handling weapons. Jenny was small and quick, with blonde hair tied back in a tight bun. Both of them had the look of soldiers who had seen real combat. "The aliens are not even trying to hide," Mike said, spitting into the dust. "Look at them up there on that ridge. They're standing around like they're watching a parade. They think this is going to be easy." Jenny pointed toward the enemy camp in the distance. "They're not even digging proper defensive positions. They've got their command post right out in the open. It's like they want us to see how confident they are." Jake nodded. He had noticed the same thing. The aliens were treating this like a demonstration, not a real battle. They expected the humans to attack in straight lines and get cut down by superior firepower. They thought it would be over in a few minutes. "What they don't understand," Jake said quietly, "is that we didn't come here to fight their kind of battle. We came here to fight our kind of battle." As the sun began to set, painting the strange sky an even deeper orange, the human forces moved into their positions. There were only 200 of them, but they moved with the precision that came from years of training together. Each soldier knew exactly what to do and when to do it. Private Danny Kim was checking his weapon when he started. T.O. hum. It was an old song, one that soldiers had sung for generations. The tune was simple but strong, the kind of melody that stayed in your head long after you heard it. Other soldiers nearby began to hum along. The sound spread through the human positions like a wave. More voices joined in, creating harmonies that seemed to bounce off the rocky walls of the canyon. The words came next, sung in low voices that carried clearly in the thin air. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," they sang. "He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored." It was an old Earth song, one that had been sung by soldiers in many wars. But the words had been changed over the years, adapted for new battles and new enemies. Now it spoke of plasma fire instead of cannon smoke, of alien worlds instead of earthly battlefields dot up on the eastern ridge. The Zelkari soldiers stopped their casual conversation and looked down at the human positions. The singing was getting louder, and there was something about it that made them uncomfortable. It was not the random noise they had expected. It was organized, purposeful, and somehow threatening. "What are they doing?" asked one of the young Zelkari warriors. "Are they performing some kind of ritual?" His commander, a veteran named Zektar, frowned as he listened. "I have studied human military history. They sing before battle to boost their courage. It is a primitive behavior, like animals howling to frighten their enemies." But even as he said it, Zektar felt uncertain. There was something different about this singing. It was not the desperate cry of frightened creatures. It was confident, almost joyful, as if the humans were looking forward to what was coming. In the Central Valley, the Korthax were having similar reactions. General Vorthak, their leader, had his soldiers check their weapons twice. The human Singing was making his troops nervous, and nervous soldiers made mistakes. "Ignore the noise," he told his officers. "It is meaningless. Focus on your targets and remember your training. These humans will break at the first sign of real resistance." But the singing continued to grow stronger. Now it was not just one song, but many songs woven together. Some humans sang in English, others in Spanish, still others in languages that the aliens had never heard before. The melodies were different, but somehow they all fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Corporal Kate Sullivan led her squad in an old Scottish war song. Her voice was clear and strong as she sang about warriors who had fought impossible battles and won through courage and determination. Her soldiers joined in, their voices creating a harmony that seemed to make the very ground vibrate. Lieutenant Chris Bennett's unit was singing something completely different. It was a song that Marines had sung for hundreds of years, about fighting in every climate and on every battlefield. The words spoke of honor and brotherhood, of never leaving a fallen comrade behind. Sergeant Tony Rivera had his men singing in Spanish, a song his grandfather had taught him about revolutionaries who had fought against overwhelming odds. The melody was sad and beautiful, but the words were full of fire and determination. All around the battlefield, different groups of humans were singing different songs, but somehow they all seemed to be part of the same larger music. It was as if every culture on Earth had contributed something to this moment, and now all of those contributions were coming together in one powerful voice. The alien observers floating in their platforms high above the battlefield were confused. This was not in any of their tactical manuals. They had studied human military doctrine for months, but no one had prepared them for this. The singing was having effects that they could not measure or predict. "Are they trying to communicate with each other?" asked one of the observers. "No," replied another. "Their radio communications are separate from the singing. This appears to be some kind of psychological preparation. But why are they doing it so openly? Do they not realize that we can hear them? Perhaps they want us to hear them. Perhaps this is some kind of intimidation tactic." Down on the battlefield, the humans were finishing their preparations. Weapons were loaded and checked. Equipment was secured. Battle plans were reviewed one final time. But through it all, the singing continued. As the last light faded from the strange orange sky, the human voices grew even stronger. Now they were singing songs that spoke of home and family, of the people they were fighting to protect. They sang about their ancestors who had faced similar challenges and found the strength to overcome them. Jake Morrison looked around at his soldiers and felt pride swell in his chest. They were outnumbered and outgunned. They were fighting on unfamiliar ground with weapons that were inferior to their enemies. By every logical measure, they should be afraid. Instead, they were singing. The battle would begin at dawn, but Jake already knew something that the aliens did not understand. His soldiers were not just individuals armed with weapons. They were part of something much larger and much older. They carried with them the spirits of every human warrior who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to give up. The aliens thought they were fighting 200 humans. They had no idea that they were about to face 10,000 years of human military tradition, given voice through ancient songs and carried forward by soldiers who understood that they were part of something eternal. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. And when it did, the galaxy would learn what those songs really meant. The first light of dawn painted the rocky battlefield in shades of red and gold. The alien forces had been awake for hours, confident that this would be a quick and easy victory. They had superior numbers, better weapons, and the advantage of high ground. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The battle began exactly at sunrise, but not the way anyone expected. Instead of a frontal assault or a desperate charge, the humans seemed to flow across the battlefield like water finding. It's way downhill. They moved in small groups, each one singing a different song, but somehow all the songs worked together like instruments in an orchestra. Alpha squad moved through a narrow canyon toward the Zelkari positions on the eastern ridge. Sergeant Tony Rivera led them in a song that his great-grandfather had sung during Earth's ancient wars. The melody was old and simple, but the words had been changed for this new battlefield. From the halls of alien worlds to the shores of distant space, they sang as they climbed over sharp rocks and through narrow passages. We will fight our planet's battles in the air, on land, and sea. The Zelkari sentries heard them coming, but something strange happened. Instead of raising an alarm, they found themselves listening to the music. The human voices seemed to have a hypnotic quality that made it hard to think clearly. By the time they remembered their duties, Alpha Squad was already in position. The first Zelkari defensive position fell without a shot being fired. The four-armed aliens simply abandoned their posts and retreated to the next line of defense. When their commander demanded to know why, none of them could give a clear answer. The singing, one of them said weakly. There was something about the singing. Meanwhile, Bravo Company was approaching the Korthax positions in the Central Valley. Lieutenant Chris Bennett led his troops in an adapted version of an old Marine hymn. Their voices echoed off the canyon walls, creating harmonies that seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the depths of space's darkness to the planets of the sun, they sang. We have fought in every system, and our battles have been won. The Korthax were reptilian warriors, proud and fierce. They had never retreated from any battle. But as the human voices grew closer, something deep in their genetic memory began to stir. Their ancestors had once faced warriors who sang before battle, on a planet so distant that even its name was forgotten. Those battles had not gone well for the Korthax. General Vorthak tried to rally his troops, but they were becoming increasingly nervous. The human singing was unlike anything they had prepared for. It was not random noise or primitive shouting. It was organized, purposeful, and somehow it seemed to be affecting their ability to think clearly. Stand your ground. He roared at his soldiers. They are just making noise. Focus on your weapons. But when the humans finally appeared, they were not the disorganized mob that the Korthax had expected. They moved with perfect coordination, as if the songs they were singing allowed them to read each other's minds. Their attacks came from unexpected directions, and they seemed to anticipate every defensive move the Korthax made. The worst situation was developing in the western caves, where the Vex had prepared their swarm attack. These insectoid aliens were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers and speed. Their flying units could move faster than most species could track, and their coordination was legendary throughout the galaxy. But as Corporal Kate Sullivan led her squad into the cave system, she began singing something that made the Vex stop in confusion. It was an old Norse war song, adapted with new words, but keeping the ancient rhythm that had once carried Viking warriors into battle. Lo, there do I see my father, she sang, her voice echoing through the caverns. Lo, there do I see my mother, and my sisters, and my brothers. Other human voices joined in from different parts of the cave system. The song seemed to bounce off the walls and multiply, creating an effect that the Vex had never experienced before. Their compound eyes, designed to track multiple targets simultaneously, became overwhelmed by the acoustic confusion. Lo, there. Do I see the line of my people back to the beginning? The humans continued singing. Lo, they do call to me. They bid me take my place among them in the halls of Valhalla, where the brave may live forever. The Vex swarm, which should have been unstoppable in the confined space of the caves, found itself flying into walls and colliding with each other. The human singing was disrupting their natural coordination in ways that their commanders could not understand or counter. Up on the observation platforms, the alien officials were watching in growing alarm. This was not the quick demonstration they had expected. The humans were not just surviving, they were winning. "How is this possible?" demanded the lead observer, a crystalline being whose species was renowned for logical thinking. "Our analysis showed that humans lacked the natural abilities necessary for effective combat." "The singing," replied another observer, this one from a species that communicated through musical tones. "They are using acoustic warfare in ways we did not anticipate. The songs are affecting both their own forces and their enemies." "But that makes no scientific sense," protested a third observer. "Sound waves cannot improve combat effectiveness." They were wrong, and the proof was playing out before their eyes. The human soldiers were not just fighting as individuals. They were fighting as a collective organism. Their songs were creating a shared consciousness that allowed them to coordinate their actions with impossible precision. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez led her unit in a Spanish war song that her grandmother had taught her. As they fought their way through Korthak's defensive positions, the melody seemed to give them strength beyond their physical limitations. They moved faster, aimed more accurately, and fought with a determination that bordered on the supernatural. "We are the children of the warriors," they sang. "We carry their strength in our hearts. We will not falter, we will not fail, for their spirits march beside us." Private Danny Kim, the soldier who had started the singing the night before, found himself in the middle of a firefight with a group of Zelkari shock troops. He should have been outmatched and outnumbered, but as he sang an old Korean war song, something extraordinary happened. Other human voices began to join his song, even though the nearest friendly troops were hundreds of meters away. Somehow, their voices carried across the battlefield with impossible clarity. The song gave him courage, strength, and most importantly, perfect awareness of where his enemies were and what they were planning to do next. The Zelkari found themselves facing a single human soldier who fought like he had eyes in the back of his head. Every time they tried to flank him, he was already moving to counter their attack. Every time they thought they had him trapped, he found an escape route they had not considered. Back at the Korthak's command post, General Vorthak was receiving reports that made no sense. His forces were not just losing, they were falling apart. Entire units were retreating without orders. Others were reporting that they could not maintain communication because of acoustic interference. "Sir," one of his communications officers reported, "the humans appear to be using some kind of sonic weapon. Our troops are reporting disorientation and loss of coordination." "Sonic weapons?" Vorthak snarled. "They are just singing. How can singing be a weapon?" But even as he said it, he could hear the human voices growing closer to his position. There was something about those songs that made his scales itch and his blood run cold. Deep in his reptilian brain, ancient memories were stirring. His ancestors had fled from warriors who sang such songs, on battlefields so old that they existed now only in genetic memory. The breakthrough came when Captain Lisa Hayes led a combined assault on the eastern ridge. Her forces approached from 3 different directions, each group singing a different song, but all the songs somehow worked together like parts of a symphony. "Battle Hymn of the Republic," sang one group. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound," sang another. "We shall overcome," sang the third. The melodies were different, but they created harmonies that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ridge. The Zelkari defenders found themselves unable to coordinate their fire. The human songs were having a psychological effect that went beyond anything they had been trained to handle. Some of them dropped their weapons and retreated. Others simply stood frozen, listening to the music with expressions of wonder and confusion. When the ridge fell, the entire alien defense began to collapse. The Korthaks in the Central Valley found themselves cut off from their command structure. The Vex in the western caves discovered that their swarm tactics were useless against enemies who could predict their movements through some kind of musical telepathy. As the sun reached its highest point in the strange orange sky, the impossible had happened. The humans had won a complete victory against superior forces, using nothing more than conventional weapons and the power of their ancient songs. But the most remarkable thing was not that they had won. It was what happened next. As the alien forces surrendered and the battle officially ended, the human singing did not stop. Instead, it changed. The war songs faded away, replaced by something older and more universal. It was a song about peace, about hope, about the bonds that connect all living beings. And as the melody spread across the battlefield, something extraordinary began. Captain Alex Murphy had never experienced anything like it in his 20 years of military service. As his unit approached the main alien command post, singing an adapted version of an old Irish fighting song, he began to hear something that should have been impossible. Other voices were joining their song. Not human voices, but alien ones. At first, he thought his ears were playing tricks on him. The stress of battle and the thin atmosphere of this strange planet could cause hallucinations. But as he listened more carefully, there was no doubt. The defeated Korthax soldiers were humming along with the human melody. When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, his soldiers sang. We'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The Korthax could not understand the words, but they were making deep, rumbling sounds that matched the rhythm of the song. Their reptilian voices created a bass harmony that made the human melody even more powerful. Lieutenant Brad Johnson, coordinating the final assault on the Vex positions, was experiencing the same phenomenon. His troops were singing Amazing Grace as they secured the cave systems, and the insectoid aliens were creating clicking sounds with their mandibles that somehow fit perfectly with the ancient hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, the humans sang. Click, click, click went the Vex, their natural communication sounds forming a percussion section that turned the simple song into something magnificent. But the most remarkable scene was unfolding on the eastern ridge, where Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was accepting the surrender of the Zalkari forces. As her soldiers sang, "We shall overcome," the four-armed aliens were swaying gently and producing harmonic tones that seemed to come from deep within their chests. "We shall overcome, we shall. Overcome, we shall overcome someday," the humans sang. The Zalkari voices rose and fell in perfect counterpoint, creating music that was beautiful beyond anything either species had ever produced alone. The alien commanders were the first to understand what was happening. General Vorth Ak of the Korthax stood in the ruins of his command post, listening to his soldiers singing with their former enemies. His military training told him this was impossible, but his ancient genetic memory was telling him something different. "This has happened before," he said quietly to his aide. "Long ago, on the old worlds before we became civilized, there were warriors who sang, and when they sang, others sang with them. It was a time of great magic, before we learned to rely on technology." His aide, a younger Korthax who had been educated in modern military academies, looked confused. "Sir, you speak of legends, primitive stories that have no basis in reality. Do they not?" Vorthak gestured toward his troops, who were now fully participating in the human songs. "Look at them. Something in their blood remembers what we have forgotten. The humans have awakened it." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the alien forces. The Vex Queen Commander, a being of perfect logical calculation, found herself unable to explain why her warriors were making music with their enemies instead of regrouping for another attack. "The harmonic frequencies," she buzzed to her advisors. "They are triggering responses in our neural networks that should not exist. We are experiencing emotions that our species abandoned millions of years ago. The Zelkari ambassador Zektar was having the most difficult time understanding what was happening. His people prided themselves on their intellectual superiority and their control over primitive emotions. Yet here he was, surrounded by his soldiers who were singing with the humans as if they were old friends. "Commander," one of his officers approached him hesitantly. "The troops are asking permission to continue singing with the humans. They say it feels ... right." Zektar wanted to order them to stop, to maintain military discipline, to remember their pride as advanced beings. But as he opened his mouth to give the command, he heard something that made him pause. The human song had changed again. Now they were singing something that was not a war song or a victory anthem. It was something older, something that spoke to needs and feelings that every living being shared, regardless of what planet they came from or what they looked like. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home," the humans sang. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." The words were in English, but somehow every alien on the battlefield understood their meaning. Home, the place where you belonged, where you were safe, where others cared about you. Every species had a concept of home, even if they expressed it differently. The Zelkari began to sing about their crystal cities on distant worlds. The Korthax sang about warm caves where their eggs were safe. The Vex created rhythms that spoke of hives where every individual was part of a greater whole, but they were not singing separately anymore. All the different songs were weaving together, creating something new and beautiful that none of them could have made alone. Up on the observation platforms, the alien officials were experiencing a crisis of understanding. Everything they thought they knew about warfare, about species relations, about the nature of consciousness itself, was being challenged by what they were witnessing. "The humans," said one observer, "they are not just soldiers. They are something else, something we do not have words for." "They are shamans," said another, using an ancient term that few species remembered. "They are bridges between the physical world and the world of spirits. When they sing, they call upon powers that science cannot measure." "But that is impossible," protested a third. "We are advanced civilizations. We have moved beyond such primitive concepts, have we?" The first observer gestured toward the battlefield below. "Look at our finest warriors, singing with their enemies as if they were family. Tell me that what we are seeing is possible according to our understanding of military science." On the battlefield, something even more extraordinary was beginning to happen. The humans were not just accepting the alien surrender. They were teaching them new songs. Songs about peace, about friendship, about working together despite differences. Corporal Jenny Walsh sat in a circle with a group of young Vex warriors, teaching them a simple children's song from Earth the insectoid aliens could not pronounce the words, but they were learning the melody and creating their own clicking harmonies. "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream," Jenny sang slowly, making sure they could follow the tune. "Merrily, merrily, 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 life is but a dream." The Vex responded with intricate patterns of clicks and chirps that transformed the simple song into something complex and beautiful. They were adding their own cultural understanding to the human melody, creating a fusion that neither species could have achieved alone. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres found himself in a similar situation with a group of Korthax veterans. These were hardened warriors who had fought in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy. Yet here they were, learning an old cowboy song that Mike's grandfather had taught him. "Home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play," Mike sang, his deep voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "Where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day." The Korthax could not understand why a song about Earth animals would be so moving, But something in the melody spoke to their own memories of open spaces and freedom. They began to add their own verses about the great plains of their homeworld, where young Korthax learned to hunt and fight. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Commander Jake Morrison met with the alien commanders to discuss the terms of surrender. Instead of a formal military ceremony, they found themselves sitting in a circle on the rocky ground, sharing songs from their respective cultures. Ambassador Thexlan of the Zelkari, who had mocked human traditions just weeks before, now found himself asking to learn more about Earth music. "Your songs," he said carefully, "they seem to have power that our technology cannot duplicate. How is this possible?" Jake smiled, remembering the laughter in the council chamber. Music is the universal language. It speaks to parts of the mind and heart that words cannot reach. When we sing together, we become more than just individuals. We become part of something larger. But why did our soldiers respond to your songs?" asked General Vorthek. "We have not sung such songs for thousands of years." "Because," Jake replied, "every species has warrior ancestors. Every people has songs that carry the memories of their greatest victories and their deepest sorrows. We did not teach your soldiers new songs. We helped them remember songs they already knew." As the strange orange sun began to set on the battlefield, something unprecedented in galactic history was taking place. Former enemies were sitting together, sharing food and stories and songs. The humans had not just won a military victory. They had won something far more important. They had reminded the galaxy what it meant to be alive. The Vex Queen Commander approached Jake Morrison as the evening grew darker. Her compound eyes reflected the light from the human campfires in thousands of tiny rainbows. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that the humans had never heard before. "Human leader," she said, "my people have not sung for 10,000 years. We became so focused on efficiency and logic that we forgot the songs of our ancestors. Today, you gave them back to us. How can we repay such a gift?" Jake looked around at the mixed groups of humans and aliens. 6 months later, Commander Jake Morrison stood once again in the great council chamber of the Stellar Alliance. But this time, everything was different. The room that had once echoed with mocking laughter now buzzed with excited conversation, and the soft sounds of alien voices humming Earth melodies. The chairs were arranged differently, too. Instead of the formal rows that emphasized separation and hierarchy, they were now arranged in a great circle. Representatives from dozens of species sat next to each other, sharing data pads and occasionally breaking into quiet songs that somehow always seemed to harmonize perfectly. Jake wore the same uniform he had worn 6 months ago, but now it carried new insignia. The humans had not just been accepted into the Stellar Alliance. They had been given a new role that had never existed before. They were the Alliance's first cultural integration specialists, tasked with helping different species understand and appreciate each other's traditions. Lieutenant Amy Parker sat to his right, wearing the uniform of the Alliance's new interspecies communication course. She had spent the last months learning 17 different alien languages and had discovered that music was indeed a universal translator. Her reports on cross-cultural harmony had become required reading at every military academy in the galaxy. Sergeant Ben Collins wore the insignia of the Alliance Peacekeeping Force. His job was to train mixed species units in the new combat techniques that humans had pioneered. Armies across the galaxy were learning that soldiers who sang together fought better together. And Ben was one of the primary instructors in this revolutionary approach to military cooperation. But the most remarkable change was not in the humans. It was in the aliens themselves. Ambassador Thexlan of the Zelkari rose from his crystal chair, but now he moved with a rhythm that had not been there before. His 4 arms swayed gently as he spoke, and his voice carried musical tones that made his words more beautiful and more persuasive than any formal speech could have been. "Fellow members of the Alliance," he said, his voice ringing like a bell through the chamber, "we gather today to welcome our newest members and to celebrate the changes that have transformed our entire civilization." A soft humming began from various parts of the chamber. It was not planned or organized. It simply happened naturally whenever the X-Len spoke these days. The Zelkari had rediscovered their musical heritage, and it had made them better diplomats, better scientists, and better friends. General Vorthak of the Korthax stood next, his massive reptilian form moving with surprising grace. 6 months ago, he had been a purely military leader, focused only on strategy and conquest. Now he was something new, a warrior poet who understood that the strongest victories were won not through force, but through harmony. The human warriors taught us something our ancestors knew, but we had forgotten, he said, his deep voice carrying the rhythmic patterns of ancient Korthax war chants. They taught us that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from singing together. Around the chamber, Korthax voices began to create the deep, rumbling harmonies that had become their signature contribution to Alliance music. Other species joined in, each adding their own unique sounds to create a symphony that grew more complex and beautiful with every voice. The Vex Queen Commander flowed to the center of the circle, her insectoid form creating the clicking rhythms that had become essential to modern Alliance communication. Where once her people had been silent and efficient, they had now become the galaxy's greatest musicians, their natural sense of rhythm providing the foundation for countless new musical forms. "We came to mock the humans for their primitive traditions," she said, her words punctuated by the musical clicks of her mandibles. "Instead, we learned that what we called primitive was actually the most advanced technology in the galaxy, the technology of the heart and spirit." Jake Morrison stood when called upon, but he no longer felt like he was facing potential enemies. The beings around him had become friends, allies, and in many cases, something approaching family. The bonds forged through shared music had proven stronger than any political alliance or military treaty. 6 months ago, you challenged us to prove our worth through combat, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. You expected us to fail because you measured us by standards that missed our greatest strengths. You saw our songs as weaknesses when they were actually our most powerful weapons. He paused, looking around the circle at faces that had become familiar and dear. But the real victory was not on the battlefield. The real victory was when you remembered your own songs and joined your voices with ours. As if on cue, voices throughout the chamber began to rise in harmony. It started with the humans singing a simple melody that had become known throughout the galaxy as the Alliance anthem. But within moments, every species was contributing their own part to the song. The Zelkari added crystalline harmonies that seemed to make the air itself shimmer. The Korthax provided deep bass notes that resonated through the floor and walls. The Vex created complex rhythmic patterns with their natural clicking sounds. The Aquans flowed through liquid melodies that seemed to wash over the other voices like gentle waves. Dozens of other species added their own contributions. The tree-like arboreals rustled their leaves in time with the music. The gaseous nebulans created wind-like sounds that carried the melody to new heights. The crystalline geologics chimed like living bells. But it was not chaos. Somehow, impossibly, all these different sounds and styles worked together to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. It was the sound of a galaxy learning to sing. As one voice dot, as the song reached its climax, something extraordinary happened. The chamber itself began to resonate with the music. The crystal formations in the walls picked up the Zelkari harmonies and amplified them. The metal supports echoed the Korthax bass notes. Even the air circulation systems seemed to be contributing to the rhythm. The entire space station was singing, when the music finally faded to gentle humming, and then to silence, the chamber remained quiet for a long moment. It was not the silence of awkwardness or uncertainty. It was the silence of beings who had shared something profound and beautiful, and were reluctant to let the moment end. Finally, Vexland spoke again, his voice soft but carrying clearly through. The chamber. The humans asked us what they could offer to our alliance. They said they brought the voices of their ancestors and the strength of their shared heritage. We thought we understood what they meant. He gestured with all four arms toward the humans, and then toward the assembled representatives. But we were wrong. They did not just bring their own ancestors. They helped us find ours. They did not just share their heritage. They helped us. Remember our own. General Vorthak nodded his massive head. Before the humans came, we had forgotten that we were more than just individuals. We had forgotten that we were part of a great chain of being that stretched back to the beginning of time and forward to the end of the universe. The Vex Queen Commander clicked her agreement. They reminded us that when we sing together, we become something greater than ourselves. We become the voice of every being who ever lived, and every being who will live. Jake Morrison felt tears in his eyes as he looked around the chamber. This was not what he had expected when he first walked into this room 6 months ago. He had come here to argue for humanity's right to join the galactic community. Instead, he had helped the galaxy rediscover its own soul. There is one more thing, he said, standing once more. The songs we shared with you are not just ours. They belong to everyone now. Take them back to your worlds. Teach them to your children. Add your own words, your own melodies, your own meanings. Make them yours. Amy Parker stood beside him. And remember that every species has songs that the galaxy has not yet heard. Share them with us. Teach us your harmonies, your rhythms, your ways of making music. Together, we can create something that no single species could ever achieve alone. As the formal session ended and the representatives began to mingle and share refreshments, the chamber filled once again with music. But now it was spontaneous and joyful, the sound of friends singing together simply because they could. Small groups formed throughout the chamber. Humans taught aliens the words to Amazing Grace. Zelkari shared the crystal harmonies of their homeworld. Korthax demonstrated the war chants that had once struck fear into their enemies and now brought joy to their friends Dot in one corner. Private. Danny Kim sat with a mixed group of young beings from a dozen different species, all of them learning a simple children's song from Earth. In another corner, Captain Lisa Hayes was collaborating with Vex musicians to create a new symphony that combined human melodies with insectoid rhythms. But perhaps the most remarkable sight was in the center of the chamber, where Jake Morrison sat in a circle with the senior commanders of the Alliance. They were not discussing strategy or politics or trade agreements. They were simply singing together, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to make the very stars shine brighter. The humans had come to the galaxy expecting to prove their worth through strength and technology. Instead, they had proven it through something far more powerful, the ability to help others remember what it meant to be alive, to be connected, to be part of something G.